chicken. I'm your guy.
Blinking.
I'll have what Joseph has.
Look, somebody's talking about you.
This is what we call the voice of God.
Popping.
Everybody just gets to focus on you.
Grab me.
Probably not the best thing for an introvert.
I'm asking for you.
Well, I like a good chicken sandwich.
Touch me. Hi, David. Comment.
Oh my God.
Like.
You're actually an identical twin.
Push.
Maybe I'll just ask Julie to talk about what it is to be
No.
an identical twin.
Pick me up.
No, you didn't.
Shouting.
Surprise! Jeremiah, just hang on a second. I just got a text.
There's an edit for your new opening, Joseph.
I feel really honored to have been here, man.
By the way, you've done a masterful job. Seriously.
It was such a joy.
Thanks, Joseph. It's an honor.
Good on you. This was a pleasure.
I mean, you are the prime example of how to pivot in this new environment.
I wish everybody gets an opportunity to interact with Joseph Jaffe and Corona TV.
Who needs Cameo when I've got my own personal Cameo? Welcome, everybody, to Corona TV. Happy Monday. Don't mind her. She's having a little bit of a temper tantrum at the moment, but she'll get over it. We're going to talk today about some pretty serious things, but we're going to talk about some things maybe a little bit more lighthearted, and maybe bridge the divide. But we're going to talk about parenting. We're going to talk about anxiety. We're going to talk about depression. We're going to talk about what happens when you find yourself in the middle of a shitstorm. Don't say that one 3 times fast, but you're going to see exactly what I mean. But yeah, welcome to the show, everyone. I cannot wait. So let's just get going. First of all, just a couple of little announcements. I'm going to get through some admin stuff and do it as quickly as I can. I am getting a little annoyed with good old Zuckerberg at Facebook. I don't like the fact that my son got in. Oh, I didn't. Did I mention this? Did I mention this? I don't think I did. On Friday evening, we found out that my son got into the University of Miami. So we were really, really happy. We're still happy. We're just, it's been such a tough year. And kids have gone through so much disappointment, which I'm sure, when I talk to Dr. Alison Escalante coming on the show, we'll talk about how kids need to manage disappointment, but how to manage that disappointment. But there is no doubt that we've all gone through just disappointment after disappointment, blow after blow over the last 12 months. But I ended up posting on Facebook. I was aware, I was sensitive about the fact that for every kid that gets in, there's a kid that gets deferred or doesn't. But I wanted to share. I needed to share. I needed to get this out my system. And 300 likes and 200 comments later, it was good to share good news for a change. But at the same time, with Corona TV, after 210, 211 different interviews, I just see the feed getting completely buried and just throttled. And I don't want to have to pay to play. And so I'm just kind of annoyed a little bit with Facebook at the moment. And I really want to build YouTube. So if you are watching on Facebook, and I can see numbers of people that are right now, I want you've been warned. This is your notice. From next week onwards, I want you to try and move over to YouTube, because I'm going to, for 1 week, experiment by actually doing away with the main Facebook feed and see what happens. Life is an adventure, and life is just a series of experiments. Speaking of which, you no doubt know that the Jaffe coin has landed, that I now have my own cryptocurrency. I'm still not quite sure what that means, but I'm figuring it out. You can actually get in on the Jaffe economy. Just go to rally.io/creators/Jaffe, and you can buy Jaffe coins. You can buy into the economy. And starting today, if you send me, you can buy the coin, right? You can hold the coin, but you can also use the coin. And one of the things you can do is send me the coin to tip me, to say thank you for the last year. You're welcome, by the way. But any person that sends me coin, you will get a shout out on the show. If you'd like a tweet-sized shout out, maybe a plug for a book you've written or your company, you just have to send me 25 or more coins. 100 or more coins will get you a shipped signed copy of my 5th book, Built to Suck, and 500 or more coins for the first 10 people, I will record a 5-minute Q&A with you with the show bumpers that you can use on your reel, on LinkedIn, whether it's for a resume or just to plug something at your company. We're all living the experiment right now, and I hope you will be part of this experiment with me. But enough about me. Let's talk about my weight. Let's talk about me again. No. So just a quick update on fat blogging. Put on a little bit of weight this week, so 184.1 pounds, but feeling pretty good about everything. Intermittent fasting is going well. Peloton is going well. And as I've mentioned to you guys before, I do tend to I feel this heaviness, aka this depression, if that's the right word, when I typically put on weight or when my weight is heading in the wrong direction. Or maybe I'll put it differently. When I lose the weight, I feel this buoyancy, this exuberance, this euphoria as well. Just very briefly, as you guys know, if you've been watching the show, today will be the Brands on Clubhouse panel or room in Clubhouse. Tomorrow, pivoting, the reinvention of brands, career, and life. And then the after show of Corona TV on Friday will be on Clubhouse on Friday. But now we get to focus on the real superstars, my guests this week. Minter, Tom, and Tracy on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But today, Dr. Alison Escalante. She's a pediatrician, a phenomenal TED speaker, a writer, and a woman on a mission. We will hear about that mission shortly. But first, let's just do some birthdays. Lema Barber, come on, you Spurs. Michael Denton, James Herring, so many blasts from the past. John January, Randall Rothenberg, who just got engaged. Congratulations to you. Barry Lipchin, that was over the weekend. Today, there's Lee Doyle, there's Mark Bailey, and then on LinkedIn, Rotem Dahan, Mark Russell, Bob Waldron, and KJ Shunk, which sounds, that's a dangerous last name, I think. And I'm just saying, it just is. John Allen, Adam Arafin, happy birthday to you. Well, I wanted to dedicate my soliloquy today to the subject at hand. And in particular, the soliloquy is called depression. I won't profess to understanding depression. I do respect it, though, and I fear it. Actually, I'm not really sure how I feel about it or how I should react to it. I don't know if I've ever been depressed in my life, but I have two shares in that regard. When I was headhunted to an advertising agency called DMBMB, which today is no more, good riddance, I had an awful time, and in particular, a bad relationship with my boss, the person who initially recruited me. I remember for that period of time, everything operated in slow motion. I remember how sluggish I was, like I was walking through wet concrete as I trudged through the hallways. It was like an allergic reaction every time I set foot in that building. Was that depression? I don't know. Maybe. These days, I'm aware of sporadic waves of a similar heaviness. They come and they go, and they seem to be kind of random. It's that familiar feeling of tiredness and hints of despair. At first, I got very self-conscious, and I did my usual oldest child thing. I kept it inside and avoided sharing it. Now, I still kind of keep it inside, but I've become much more comfortable opening up and letting my wife know in particular how I'm feeling and that I'm feeling a little off. I've also leaned into it. I don't fear it as much anymore. I would probably stop short of saying I've embraced it, but I am buoyed by the fact and the belief that it will pass. So I guess I'm one of the lucky ones. I try and counterbalance it with some stabilizing forces, like the perspective that there are so many people that are worse off than me, or to focus on the good things going on in my life. When it comes to anxiety, I've been told I should consider medication, but to be honest with you, that just makes me more anxious. Similarly to steering into the skid of depression, I've toyed with the fact that I might just be a little eccentric, which is a euphemistic way of saying maybe I'm somewhere on the spectrum. But at the end of the day, aren't we all? Personally, I feel very comfortable sharing this with you today. In fact, it's actually quite liberating. It's clear when it comes to the subject, I know very little. But when it comes to myself and my life, who knows me better than me? Strike that. I do know one thing for sure. It's just critical to talk it out, to talk to people, talk out loud, talk to yourself. You can even answer back, just like I did right now. So that's kind of, I guess, how I feel about depression. And I certainly would love to hear what you think. And I would love to hear what my guest today thinks as well. Alison Escalante, Dr. Alison Escalante, and we'll talk about that in a moment, is a pediatrician, TED speaker, writer, and woman on a mission to ease the epidemic of anxiety that has convinced us we are always failing and is stealing our joy. She calls it the Shouldstorm. She's developed a 3-step method to help professionals and parents hack their own brains to break out of the Shouldstorm and live and work more skillfully and joyfully. Dr. Escalante is a contributor for Forbes, where she writes about the science of human performance. She also writes for Psychology Today about life in the culture of anxiety. She's an adjunct professor of pediatrics at Rush University. She has degrees from Princeton in the history of ideas. What an awesome thing to have a degree in. And Rutgers in medicine, and did a pediatric training at Duke and the University of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming her to the show. Welcome, Allison, to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I just loved your soliloquy today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So at the beginning, I said to you, do I call you doctor or do I call you Allison? And what did you say to me?
I said, I'm fine with Allison unless you normally refer to male doctors as doctor. And that's because I'm not picky about it, but we've found in our equity work, because one of the things I do a little bit of is equity work in medicine, is that it's very common on TV or in interviews for women doctors to be referred to by their first name, but our male colleagues are often referred to as doctor. I've never cared about it, but now I'm starting to make a point of it, as if the guys are doctor, then I'm doctor too.
I love that, actually, and immediately, I didn't hesitate. I said, nope, I call everyone I'd like to call everyone by their first name, unless they personally would prefer otherwise. But I thought that was a great, it's important as well. And, as we figure our way through this, diversity, equality, inclusivity, necessary path, we have to become more self-aware and force ourselves to kind of open up and recognize, even in a title, how we might have, how we might have discriminated in the past. And so I just appreciate it. I mean, I knew I liked you anyway, but now especially because it's an important point as well. There is so much to talk about. In my soliloquy, I wanted to, touch on my own personal, feelings about the subject, recognizing that, I think I know quite a little, but I think sometimes it's important to recognize, to admit what you don't know, rather than go through life with the bravado, and the confidence bordering on arrogance to think you know all the answers, when the reality is we're all figuring things out every single day of our lives.
Well, that's an insider tip for picking a doctor. If you ever have a doctor who thinks they know everything, run. Because being a doctor is all about constant learning, constant updating, and then of your knowledge and your science, and then making sure that you're hearing people. Just because this is the 47,000th cold I've ever taken care of doesn't mean it's not a unique experience. But I was really, there were so many things you said I wanted to talk about. One of them was just referring to yourself as a first child and your response being immediately like, oh, keep it in, don't talk about it, be strong. I'm a first. So of course that is absolutely my default strategy. But one of the things you said was, I was in this workplace and I felt this feeling of heaviness and sluggishness, like I was walking through concrete. You might have even felt that in your thinking, kind of a sluggishness in your thinking and a disconnection. And you said, I don't know if it was depression, but I know what I felt. Well, I wanted to start the conversation today by talking about what you might have been feeling, because what you're describing is an immobilization response. And so basically what we're starting to understand is that much more of our behavior and our experience has to do with what's going on in our deep nervous system than we realize. We think it's all in our thoughts and it's all under our control. But we actually have a system that is constantly picking up data from our world and processing it to determine if we're safe or not, and then what the best response is. And the doctor who really has done the main research on this is called Stephen Porges. He's at UNC and he's developed what's called the Polyvagal Theory. And he calls this neuroception, where you're constantly picking up on things. And it happens at a preconscious level. So you're responding to things without always knowing what you're responding to. Now, you were able to identify that it was your work context, but it can happen from someone's body language, from a deep rumbling noise in the background. And when it sets off a sense that we're not safe, our body chooses one of two defense strategies.
And so, we hear a lot, obviously, about fight, flight, freeze. A lot of this, and in fact, how we even come to know each other is through this article. And I forget where I saw it. It might have been on LinkedIn as well. But talk about an important headline. We've got depression all wrong. It's trying to save us. And that's where I think you introduce this new report, and I'll read it, or at least it's in October, the British Psychological Society published a new report on depression, stating that depression is best thought of as an experience or set of experiences rather than a disease. And then it gets into the polyvagal theory. So I would love for you to just introduce and expand on the article and the theory, and bring up this concept of immobilization.
So this is a very difficult topic. And as soon as the article was published, there was a great deal of acclaim, therapists coming out and saying hallelujah and things like that. But there was also some pushback. And I honestly don't know if the Twitter comments were by people who actually read the article or not, but they said things like, well, she has never had depression. How could she know? I beg to differ. But also, the point is that I care for kids. I'm a pediatrician and I take care of people with depression. So when I talk about this, it is with an intense awareness of the pain it causes, the devastation it can cause. But we have to understand why it's happening. And if we don't understand why it's happening, then we can't help people effectively. So it starts with something called the immobilization response. So basically, you nailed it. There's two main defense strategies. Briefly, there's fight or flight, which is when the sympathetic nerve gets activated. And that leads us, that's when your kid's in fight or flight, they're going to be giving you a hard time about homework and trying to avoid it, right? Because they're terrified of their math homework. And that might sound silly, but if you've seen math today, you understand.
I avoid it.
Yes. And then if eventually you get to the point where fight or flight is not going to work, where you realize, and this is not at a conscious level, this can be at a deeper nervous system level, that you're not going to be able to get away from the threat with a fight or flight response, then your body moves into the shutdown response, which is sometimes referred to as the freeze response or the immobilization response. And that response is in the one pathway of our vagus nerve. It's called the dorsal part of the vagus nerve. And with that shutdown comes a disconnection, a numbness of emotion, a slowdown in our thinking, in our bodies, a heaviness, a lack of enjoyment, like we stop enjoying what we normally enjoy. In other words, it's a play dead response. And it comes from our ancient heritage, from our reptilian ancestors. That's actually their only defense response, is if they're in danger, they just shut down. And it has a valuable purpose, but it was designed for a different life. So, for instance, if you've ever seen a nature show where like a fox catches a rabbit, the rabbit just goes numb and stops moving. And this is very helpful to the rabbit because there's a pain numbing and a disconnection, so that the rabbit, when the rabbit is being eaten, is not actually fully experiencing that. The rabbit is pulled apart from that experience. And then it's amazing that this will happen to us as a survival strategy in our normal lives. And so we can see the value in like a different world, but it's hard to understand how it's valuable for us today.
I mean, normally I would say the elephant in the room, but in this case, I would say the rabbit in the room is the fact that it may not end well for the rabbit, but the rabbit doesn't end or doesn't go in pain. Of course, there can be, and we hope that there is a happy ending, which is somehow the fox puts the rabbit down and the rabbit springs to life and hops off to live to fight another day. But I think we'll get into that. I think in terms of when what is depression trying to tell us? How is depression trying to save us? And then at what point does it actually become this foreboding, forbearance or harbinger of ominous things to come, which of course we have to call it as we see it, which is in particular an epidemic today, which is suicide, brought on by and exacerbated by COVID, no doubt.
Right. Well, there's so much to your comments there. I mean, I think I'll just use an example of a story I shared in the article, because one of the things that is amazing to me is not only do I hear my patients' stories, but I become very close with their parents. And so I've heard a lot of people's stories as well. And so this one is privacy protected, so you can't tell who I'm talking about. I'm not giving anyone's story away. But this woman shared with me that her father had been very abusive. And there was verbal abuse and there was physical abuse. But one of the things, and it took her years to understand this because she went through, she experienced a lot of depression, and she had to discover this over time in her work of therapy, was that when she would shut down, when she would immobilize, that kept her safe because her father was so violent. And one of the things he really looked for was any sense of resistance or rebellion. Even an offsaid word could lead to abuse. Any sense that she was resisting his authority in any way, including his quote, his sense that he had a right to hurt her, would lead to abuse. And the only thing that seemed to keep from triggering him was when she was numb to it. So that shutdown response actually was, and she could never have put those words to it as a child, but it was a strategy her nervous system discovered when it found that fight or flight, which is a form of resistance, led to more abuse, whereas shutdown kept her alive. And then eventually, because she was able to connect with a good therapist and talk about it, and I'll explain why that's so important too, not only was she able to move through some of the depression, but she was also eventually able to look back and stop blaming herself for freezing, start understanding that this wasn't just a passive thing. She wasn't a weakling. Her body had chosen a defense strategy that kept her alive.
I think about two forms of this idea of shutting down. There is an antiquated, outdated approach, which is the prototypical male, the father of the house who doesn't communicate, who shuts down, who builds up all of these walls, and the more you try and attempt to get in or not even break in or be allowed in, the more the resistance, is put up and the pushback emerges. And then I think about present day, and I think about what does that immobilization look like going through COVID right now, realizing how much insanity there is around us, whether it was social unrest, whether it was political upheaval, whether it was just blatant death, whether it was financial, devastation. Is that part of this coping mechanism, which is just to say, let me just focus on putting one foot in front of the other, or small victories? Maybe, I'm not even trying to be frivolous about it. Maybe it's getting a personal best on the Peloton, or just being able to blinker out everything around you for sake of going mad.
Yeah, so I would say small victories is not an example of the immobilization response, right? That's you finding a way to keep active in the middle of it. And it's actually a wonderful strategy that's been found to really help us with our resilience during hard times. Find winnable things that you can do, right? I went through a couple months during COVID where I couldn't focus on anything. I mean, I was able to see my patients, but I couldn't really, I didn't want to write. I didn't want to do anything else. All I wanted to do was organize my closet. And I did a massive 6-week closet redo. And I was worried there might be something wrong with me. And then I talked to Dr. Pauline Boss, who is one of the greats in psychology, who discovered what's called, it's a kind of loss where it's unclear. And the word will come to me. But she said, oh, no. This is absolutely a case of ambiguous loss, coronavirus. And it just goes on and it doesn't resolve. And I tell people to find a project, like learn to bake something so that you get a reward at the end and you have a success, right? So anytime we feel heaviness, just think about a task you don't like doing. Many of us we can think about a task that we really don't enjoy, and we'll have that experience, right? And that's just a very small version of it. So that's what's important to understand. Is the story I used is a fairly extreme one, although not as uncommon as you might think, for why this response helps us. But we all use it as a strategy, right? And think about a healthy use of it, right? Let's say I'm thinking about a task I really don't want to do, right? What happens? I might go, if I'm able to work with that feeling, I might say, wow, why do I want to avoid this so much? And I might think it through and say, well, do I need to do it today? Is it something that I can put off till a time when I'm more motivated? Is this a sign that I just need to actually get some exercise on the Peloton, or, do something else, right? Because our lives are so full of shoulds. I actually felt this way this weekend. I should be preparing some slides for a presentation I'm giving. And I should be getting an article done that I have due at Forbes. But I was just, every time I thought about that, I was just like, And what I wanted to do was take my dog to the dog park. What I wanted to do was hang out with my kids a little bit. So that was a signal to me that I noticed that response, and I said, well, this is a sign that I've been working too hard and I need to recenter and do some of those other important things, and it restored my energy. So after, later tonight, I'll probably finish that article I've got due.
Well, I will read that article. But now you've certainly given us an interesting hack, which is organizing your closet is a shortcut to being able to kind of figure it out. But I want to go back to that idea of there are two things that I definitely two things for sure that I wanted to discuss, and then we can get into. It's certainly not lighter. I mean, relatively, it's lighter, but it's in no way, shape, or form less important, which is parenting and anxiety in general. At what point, if depression is trying to tell us something, if depression is trying to save us, not maybe help us, but at least save us short term, at what point do we need to recognize, and maybe it's less about us coping with depression and about helping others who are going through it? At what point does it become nefarious? At what point do we intervene, or what can we do to help people going through this moment, recognizing that some of it initially can actually be saving them?
So the first article I wrote on this series was actually in Forbes, and it was about a research paper written by biological anthropologists who were looking at the social role of depression, of ADHD, of PTSD, of anxiety, and saying, these are probably not really mental disorders. These are probably strategies, adaptive responses to adversity when you look at how these things work. And the thing about depression is we've talked about two branches of the deeper nervous system, or the autonomic nervous system, but we haven't talked about the fun one. And that's the ventral vagus nerve. That is the newest in evolution. It's new with mammals. And that is the one that gives us a social connection. So when our ventral vagus nerve is activated, like mine is right now talking with you, you feel connected. Maybe happy, but certainly not deeply down. There's a sense of being open and able to engage. And the other thing is really interesting is when we're in that state of regulation, our higher brain centers turn on. So our executive function and our frontal lobe is really good. And we're able to do our best thinking, our creative thinking, and all of that. But that will get shut down by defense responses if we perceive enough threat. Now, the defense responses are meant to be short term. So when they go on long term, there's well-documented impact on the brain. The cells start to change what they're doing. They start to change the way DNA is manifested. You start to see eventually actual shrinkage in the amygdala and the hippocampus, where our emotional centers are. That's where our deeper nervous system comes in and kind of connects with our higher brain. So you're actually seeing injury to the brain over time. So how do you turn that around? Well, the first thing is, the alternative to either a fight or flight or a freeze, faint, or immobilization response is connection, social connection. And so it's getting our social nervous system back online. And one of the most effective ways to do that, besides friends and family who only work if they're willing to listen to you with acceptance, is a skilled therapist, or also a caring doctor, because they can not only connect with you, but they can help you work through the thought processes. And that is tremendously healing. But the other thing is, sometimes those areas have been down so long, they need a way to basically regrow those emotional centers that have been injured. And that's called neuroplasticity, where you're growing new nerves, you're growing new pathways. And a lot of times medication is very helpful for that. We've found that a lot of our antidepressants can promote that neuroplasticity. And then other therapies are being studied for that purpose. In the end, depression, when it's become chronic, is bad for you, although again, in that one case I talked about, I don't know what her alternative was. If there was no way to get away from her father, it was probably best that she stayed depressed through her childhood. Thank God, that she didn't progress all the way to the end.
I I'm smiling. Well, I'm smiling because you're smiling at me too, and that is and the connection that we have right now. But I'm also smiling because this is what I live, and this has been my life for the last year, which is everyday connection with a new friend, as I call them, and through some, we've seen certainly the good, the bad. We've certainly seen the bad and the ugly of social media, but we've also seen the good and the great, which is the ability to connect. And so I was just smiling because I've seen firsthand the power of connection, the power of being able to reach out. David Libby says connection is the opposite of addiction too. And I always have a quote for my guests. This was today's quote. You don't need to guess who said it because it is attributed to Anonymous. So you're off the hook. But it said, the only thing more exhausting than being depressed is pretending that you're not.
That's right, because it takes constant energy, right, to push through that heaviness and fake it. And it's incredibly painful. The only thing more painful than being in pain is being isolated with your pain. And unfortunately, our culture really drives these problems because our culture tells us we should be shiny and happy and successful. We should keep our kids happy. We should make sure our kids don't suffer. If our kids go through anything, it's our fault. And we're also told that if we don't do all those things we should, we're going to mess up our lives. We're going to mess up our kids' lives. And that's what I call the Shouldstorm. And it drives this constant criticism and anxiety that is it's really toxic for us. And we see it in the workplace. We absolutely see it in medicine. So many doctors have said, oh my gosh, we absolutely have our own Shouldstorm here. But the place I first started talking about it was in the parenting world and the parent-child relationship.
Well, listen, you've spoken about what happens when the should hits the fan, what happens when you lose your should. It's the gift that keeps on giving. But I was so connected watching your TED talk, and by the way, if you're watching today, I'm going to provide links to Alison's article, and you should go and check out that TED talk. But you said something, and I'll just read a few little takeaways and sound bites from this really, really excellent talk. The Shouldstorm is what you call the culture of anxiety and criticism that drives perfectionism in both professional lives and in parenting. You said anxious parents raise anxious kids. Perfectionist parents produce demanding kids, fearful kids who think they can't do things for themselves. And this really blew me away, that 1 in every 3 kids will meet the criteria for anxiety disorder by the time they're 18. That is not good. That is not okay in a time when we are medicating and over-medicating potentially our children, where they are surrounded by all the stimulus, by the bad kind of social media. It just seems a little bit overwhelming and suffocating. So how do we make our way through the Shouldstorm?
Yeah. And, I think the most critical thing to understand is I'm not blaming parents. I'm a parent myself, and I feel the Shouldstorm every day. But the first step is understanding the culture we're in, because what happens with ideas that are buried in our culture, the sociologists call this cultural schemata. They're like operating systems. Like this is how we work, and we never question it because that's the way things are. And the problem with that is then you live your life on it, and you don't know what's wrong. Like, why is this not working? And why can't I ever get it right? And I'm never doing enough. And if this sounds familiar in your workplace, that's because this is what's happening at work. In fact, the pandemic has actually injected the Shouldstorm with steroids. It's out of control because I'm hearing people are at home on Zoom all day for 12 hours with no potty breaks. I mean, the only profession that ever worked without eating or having a potty break was medicine. Like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, that's so true. And by the way, Allison, one of the I had a guest on the show who actually said, Sarah Townsend, who actually gives advice for freelancers, and one of her hacks is to drink a should load, I should say, of water, because what it's doing is it's forcing you to get up and go. Exactly. It's okay in this interview if you actually get up and go to the toilet, but it's good because it's allowing the blood to flow and for us to just break away from the monotony as well.
Right. And so the first step is that aha moment where you're like, oh, it's not me, right? I'm constantly anxious about my child because I've been told that if I make one mistake, I'm going to mess up their life forever, that I should keep them perfectly safe emotionally, physically, that I should make sure they have great academic achievement, that I should make sure they never feel bad, but also I'm supposed to somehow build their emotional resilience, and I should make sure they're fully equipped for an adult life. This is a no-win situation, right? If you keep your child comfortable all the time, they're not going to learn skills. You're going to teach them that they're not able to handle things. But parents are told they should be doing this, and they're exhausted and they're burnt out. And yes, research shows parent burnout is a real thing. And then this same behavior and culture in the workplace can drive burnout as well. So the second thing is then having something you can actually grab onto. It's not enough to know. We've got to have something that can help us make a behavior change. And that's where I came up with the sigh, see, and start method, which is where every time you feel a should, sigh, see, and start. Sigh. Take a deep breath into your body and let it go long and slow. This is one of my favorite brain hacks because we all sigh. Parents tell me all the time, oh my gosh, I sigh at my kids, doc. I can totally do that, right? But the sigh actually tells the nervous system that we're safe. So it can actually start to shift us out of some of those defense strategies that we talked about earlier into the social nervous system. And
just to reiterate, it's actually physiological, the sigh. It's not if I'm using the word correctly, it's not psychosomatic. It actually there is a real tangible output and outcome from a sigh.
Yeah, I'm increasingly starting to think that we need to stop using the term psychosomatic because when we have stress-related symptoms, they're very real. And shifting our nervous system can make a big difference there. So once you sigh because a lot of parents spend their life in fight or flight mode, right? Like they're under so much pressure from the should storm that they are constantly like on alert, trying to get stuff done. And that disconnects us from our kids. That's not social, right? So once you sigh, bring yourself down, then see your child. Try to see without immediately trying to fix anything. Just see what's going on. See your child's body language. See the situation. And then and only then start. And this is my favorite part. You can start thinking about what's appropriate here. You can start trying something different. You can start something. You can start nothing, or you can start the wrong thing. It doesn't matter. Because if you're in the right state when you're starting, you're learning experimentally. And so if you get it right, you filed away a learning. If you get it wrong, you're probably going to feel a should. Oh, I should have done it that way. That's okay. We know what to do when we feel a should. Sigh, see, and start again. Now, this technique's really simple, but practicing it actually is not easy. But when you get the hang of it, it seems to really transform things. But I think one of the reasons for that is because we actually know what we're doing more than we think. We just keep letting ourselves get dysregulated by our culture.
There are a whole bunch of things that I love about sigh, see, and start. starting with the fact everything seems to be like operating in S's now in my mind, but it's the first thing we almost want to do instinctively as parents is start, or solve, right? Solve the problem or save our children instead of just allowing them to be. And maybe there's one more S word, which is slow down. Slow down. It also makes me think this is almost like a slightly antiquated, but when we tell our kids to count up to, count down from 10 or up to 10, in a way, that's kind of what we're doing, is to allow them to just slow down and maybe, I don't know, get in a couple of sighs there.
Well, that's right. Modeling this for our kids can teach them to use this strategy themselves, or at least the general approach. It's funny because when we don't slow down as parents, we just go right to start. You're absolutely right. But we're always responding to something. And so if we go right to start, we are responding to the should in our head. We're not really responding to the child or the situation. And then what's cool about SciC and Start is I designed it for the moment under pressure, but it also can work as a strategy over time. So you can use it in thought work. I use it in my role as a doctor all the time. And, that's one of the things that I'll be exploring when the book Shouldstorm, Why Worried Parents Raise Worried Kids and What to Do About It finally comes out. Currently, it's sitting with an agent in New York, and we're working through the proposal. But there's a lot of you can go as shallow or as deep with this strategy as you need, but it's simple enough to use in the pressured lives that we live.
Well, by the way, when the book comes out, you have an open invitation to come back. And I know, unfortunately, you can't make it to the after show today, but what a great opportunity. No, but it's when you come back and the book comes out, maybe there'll be an opportunity to another S, supersize the after show. But there is an amazing story that you tell in that TED talk about feeding your son off the floor. I wonder if you could tell that story and just the context of a different kind of problem solving that came through that.
Yeah, that's one of those stories that the first time I ever told it publicly, it was at a Bad Moms party. And much of us got together in our neighborhood and celebrated the Bad Moms movie, and we all told stories. And it was really interesting because it was such an example of the Shouldstorm. The other moms shared stories, but none of them were actually bad. And we shared them anonymously. We had to guess who did it. They were all like things that were out of their control that just happened. Like their kid bumped their hand when they were like closing the car door and stuff, Mine was the only true bad mom story. And it was this, when my first son was born, he had a rare type of food allergies that were very severe. And like many kids with that level of food allergy, when we finally were able to start feeding him foods, he was extremely picky. But he was picky to the point that he was actually failing to gain weight. So it was a medical issue. And I read the book all about picky eaters and what you're supposed to do. It's a wonderful book. And none of it worked. And I remember one time looking at I learned to let him eat while I was looking the other direction, because if he saw that I was paying attention to his eating, he would stop eating. One time I remember him with Cheerios, and I turned to his high chair, and he's got a Cheerio on the way to his mouth, and he looks at me and he puts the Cheerio down. That's how severe it was. So one night when he hadn't eaten anything, and we were just so frustrated, my husband let him down out of his high chair, and I was taking some dishes into the kitchen. And I hear my husband say, "Don't look now." And so, of course, I looked. And there was my son crawling around on the floor, gobbling up the very food that he had refused to eat and had thrown on the floor. And so I go to stop him because it's gross. And then I felt myself just sigh because he was finally eating something. And I could see that, he is eating, and, it's the floor, but at that moment, I started allowing him to eat off the floor. And after that, when he would do the same thing, and my husband and I would let him down and intentionally let him eat what he had thrown off his tray. And for a couple months there, that was the only way he ate anything. And we used to hold hands and giggle about it, because wouldn't people think we were terrible that the pediatrician's kid is eating off the floor? But later, I understood that that wasn't really bad parenting. It was creative parenting. We found a way to solve a problem. And I'll tell you, as a pediatrician, we're a lot less worried about dirt on the floor than most people are. So, yeah.
Yeah, turns out we had to worry about dirt and small particles and viruses outside of the home compared to inside. That's right. There are two more S's that I want to chat about. The first S is, and it links back to depression, is the word stigma. Yeah. And I think when you talk about this culture of perfectionism, this culture also bringing up kids that don't know how to fail, or what it is to deal with not being perfect. There's also the stigma of what it is to be a great parent, of being ostracized or ridiculed by a stranger based on not wearing, dressing your kid up appropriately. But I think part of what I take away from this is you got to cope any way you can. And you got to cope in a way that works for you, regardless of what society or what your boss or what your best friend or what someone on social media has to say or thinks about you. That is definitely how I think maybe we can counter the perception of what is considered to be the right way, when quite frankly, we're just all making it up as we go along.
Well, I call it should-free parenting. There's actually a group on Facebook, Should-Free Parenting, where we explore these ideas together. But what we talk about a lot is should-free parenting doesn't mean I don't care, willy-nilly, whatever. This is a committed, we want to be great parents. We want to do what our kids really need, and that helps them develop so that they can become who they're meant to be and have the skills they need. But the Shouldstorm gets in the way of that. It gets between us and our kids, and it makes us parent in a less skillful way. So admitting that our culture is doing this to us and getting to a place where we can do it the way that works from us is really important, especially if we're noticing our child and seeing that this is working for them. But it's even more helpful if you can do it in a trusted community, because it's very hard to go against the current of a culture alone. And that's such an American idea, right? We go it alone, but it doesn't make any sense when you look at the way our nervous system is built. We're wired for community, and if we try to go it alone, we tend to just always be in reacting against our culture. So we're not really as independent as we think we are. We can actually find that independence through more connection with our kids and with each other.
What a great quote. We're wired for community. We're wired for connection. There is one more S to discuss, and that S, and I think, again, it comes back and brings us full circle. And it's something we're hearing about a lot these days, and that is self-care. And the analogy that I've been using many times is when you're on a plane, and for those people that need a reminder what a plane is, remember when we used to fly? But when the mask comes down, or when we're being told about the mask, we're told to put it on our own mouths before our infant, our toddler, our elderly parent. It makes no sense to want to take care of ourselves before we take care of others. And yet, if we can't take care of ourselves, how on earth could we ever imagine taking care of others, especially those that need our help? So I would love for you to share maybe a couple of ideas on self-care in terms of navigating through the shitstorm, coping with anxiety, coping with inadequacy, coping with the imposter syndrome, and all of the, so many things going on in our lives. but ultimately navigating through immobilization back to some kind of connection again, if you will.
Yeah, I actually want to pull it back a level and go a little meta, because before you can get to self-care, self-care is just one more stressful thing unless you go up to self-compassion. So for many parents, self-care immediately becomes another should. You should also be taking care of yourself, right? And you should be less stressed. So self-compassion is amazing because it's so different from its predecessor, self-esteem, right? Self-esteem really ultimately is all about me. I'm wonderful and glorious and you love me. That's self-esteem and makes us feel like imposters. But self-compassion is simply the discipline of treating myself with the same basic respect and kindness that I would treat anyone else. And this is incredibly hard for people. And in our culture, it's especially hard for women. It is actually, I really encourage an internal dialogue where you're having a conversation. We all have a critical voice. So creating a voice of self-compassion. So like the other day, it's February in Chicagoland. I guess it's March now. There's still snow outside. We've been cooped up in the house. My kids haven't had play dates in months because of the pandemic, and everybody's just frayed. And I got to a point where my son really pushed my buttons enough that I really yelled at him in a way I didn't like. Well, the old me would have said, "Oh, you idiot, you shouldn't have done that. That was a bad example, and you should feel really bad about that. And you're going to teach him all the wrong things and you're going to mess it up." Instead, I said, "Oh, okay. All right, honey, you're having this is rough. This has been quite a day. And I know you shouldn't have yelled at him, but like, how can we reset this and repair?" And it's just different. Treating myself the way I might treat him when he's when he's really upset, right? With a little comfort and compassion makes a huge difference. And then it's much easier to come out of that pressured response yourself and take that back to your kid. So what I said to him is, "Whoa, I'm sorry. You know how, you know what it's like. Like we can sometimes yell when we lose it. And I'm real sorry about that. How can we start again?" And sometimes I'll ask my kids, like, how did that make you feel and stuff. But the point is to understand that our mistakes are not the end. They're not the final outcome. It's how we move forward together. And it's whether we are able to restore connection in a flexible way that matters.
Self-compassion before self-care, and you can add in selflessness or even a good kind of selfishness as well. But it is permission. It is permission for compassion, which sounds insane, but it's important. We have just a couple of moments left, and I could not think of a more perfect Corona question, which actually came from last week's conversation with Donnie Salazar, which is, and a more perfect person to kick it off is, Allison, describe what is a good day in your life?
So right now during coronavirus, a good day is if none of my patients are hospitalized. If we're able to sit down for family dinner, which is something we've been able to do a lot more during the pandemic. If I've been able to take my dog for a walk, those are the really good things.
The final S, which is simple and simplicity, singularity, being able to focus on what is important. Well, I've loved this conversation. I'm so happy that you came into the studio and shared some of the new thinking with us. For those of you that want to find out more about Allison, you can connect with her on LinkedIn, as well as, of course, the usuals, the Twitter, the Insta as well. You can, and I've already pasted this article. We've got depression all wrong. It's trying to save us. Allison, if you want to just talk to it as well, you've written several ebooks right now on hacking your brain to unlock your leadership, and of course what we discussed today, Should Free Parenting. And you also have an email course for parents looking to change their child's behavior while getting free of the anxiety. And people can find out more at shouldstorm.com or AlisonEscalante.com. So do you want to just tell us very briefly about the 2 ebooks and or the email course? It can be and, not or.
Absolutely. You know, the process of writing the proper book, Shouldstorm, has been much longer than I expected, which is probably true for everyone who writes their first book. And so these were my way of giving people something to work with while we're getting there. It's all free. You know, I just want people to have the resources. Basically it dives a little deeper into how to use the size, see, and start method, either at work in terms of a work role or a leadership role, or as a parent.
All right. And again, you can find out more at Allison's website. Good luck with the book. No more putting off or I should have done another rewrite. I should have done my editing. I can tell you, as someone who's written 5 books, that it is, it takes a village. In fact, what I found out the hard way is the work only begins when you've actually finished right. But we are all looking forward to reading it, to buying it. Thank you so much for coming in. I will be back tomorrow with Minter Dial. And Allison, just before you leave, we always have a final verdict on our guest from the resident warden, Mr. Chuck Norris. And I have a feeling I know what he's going to say.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
Like there was any doubt. Take care, Allison. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Corona TV with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. Corona TV is the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing. The after show on Zoom starts right now at bit.ly/Corona TV After Show. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show at coronatv.show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, text Corona TV to 66866 or visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.